Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Mark, for the handover, and welcome to our 2017 Customer Experience Excellence Centre webinar. As Mark says, my name is Craig Ryder, and along with my colleague David Conway, we'll take you through a summary of the themes and findings from this, our 8th annual UK study. As you can see on screen, this year's report is called The Connected Experience Imperative, and it's a title that reflects our views that the future for customer experience leaders really and increasingly lies in a company's ability to not simply gather customer ratings, but to connect multiple data and intelligence sources to help drive a deeper understanding of what really matters to customers and ultimately guide investment into those initiatives that will really drive KPIs in the organisation. So how can an organisation deliver a truly connected experience? Well, we've got a quote on screen in front of you now, which is taken from the report, and it encapsulates many of the ideas that we see driving forward some of the leading brands in the study this year, and in fact over the last 2 or 3 years. So I've picked out in italics 5 key phrases that together really provide a platform for transformation for organisations that can implement the ideas. So the first phrase is integration and connection is key. And by this we mean data and actions across the organisation can really no longer stand alone. Decisions need to be fully informed and then fully supported across the business. The second element we've pulled out is the idea that front and back office boundaries are blurring. And from what we see, legacy structures and mindsets and systems just can often get in the way of delivering true customer centricity. The third of our quotes is close to customers, and this is really about organisations truly knowing customers, listening to everything they say, really everywhere they say it, not simply relying on customer ratings. Our fourth component is being driven to innovate, and again, this is an organisational mindset that isn't simply about putting a sticking plaster over individual customer issues as they come in, but actually seeing every piece of feedback as a trigger for innovation. And finally, structuring in new and exciting ways. We're starting to see in the US in particular a move towards a radial structure with the customer absolutely at the heart of the organisation, at the heart of decision making and at the heart of reporting lines. So in the next 40 minutes or so, myself and David will take you through some of the issues that lie behind these points. If you have any questions, then use the WebEx system during the session, and we are leaving some time at the end to answer them. So by all means, fire your questions from the moment they occur to you. So this afternoon we're going to take you through these 5 points. But first of all, a very, very brief overview of what the Customer Experience Excellence Centre actually is. So it's actually the summation of 8 years of ongoing research into customer experience around the world. In fact, by the end of 2018, we'll have covered 17 markets globally. As of now, we've got over 1.8 million customer evaluations of over 1,500 cross-sector brands. So this is a huge resource, much of which is online and available. Out of our initial work and continually refreshed and evidenced is the idea that customer experience can be defined through a 6-pillar framework, which you see below. We come onto that briefly a little later. But really, these 6 pillars act as the DNA of outstanding customer experiences and help organisations really understand where their customer experience development needs lie. This 6-pillar framework and the Customer Experience Excellence Centre resource is really designed to help organisations shape their voice of the customer programs, help deliver experience design to define what the future looks like for their customers, help define customer experience strategies that have the ability to differentiate and drive the bottom line, and also link into an ability to really understand the economics of customer experience, which we see as an absolutely vital part of the next decade in customer experience development. So this year's study was in the UK in field during July, and we talked to over 10,000 customers who evaluated approaching 300 brands across the 10 industries you see there on the right. Each of the 10,000 customers compares their views on a number of brands that they've interacted with over the previous 6 months. And they do that by using the 6-pillar framework I previously mentioned. So you can see the 6 pillars there in front of you: personalization, integrity, managing expectations, resolution, time and effort, and empathy. Those components make up a DNA of what customer experience is. The technique we used in our survey, and have used now for 6 years, is a technique called critical incident questioning. And what it does is it picks up on organizations for whom customers give low scores, picks up where those low scores are attached to one of the 6 pillars, and asks the customer to explain in their own words what went wrong, or indeed what went right. This then gives us a very clear view of which brands excel, which brands have got work to do, and crucially, specifically, which component of their customer experience is in need of most attention. So, while most companies agree that customer centricity is a good thing, there's still a strong EXCO challenge often around economic proof points. So the next couple of slides will illustrate how we see customer experience benefits can best be delivered across the business, and some proof points that our analysis of the Customer Experience Excellence Centre surveys over the last couple of years have shown that customer experience can deliver revenue and profit growth. What you can see on the slide in front of you now is a typical customer journey. Our research shows that organizations at the forefront of customer experience are in fact driving their profitability by focusing much more on the customer journey and much less on simple touch points, which has tended to be the shape of customer experience measurement over the last 4 or 5 years. This goes hand in hand really with organizations designing customer experiences for the future with the bottom line in mind. And the diagram highlights some of the typical benefits of the journey rather than the touch point focus. So if we take, for example, the purchase journey point, we can see that costs can be attacked by, for example, reducing call center costs on the back of reducing failure demand, where we have a really forensic understanding of the customer's information needs at the point of purchase and prior to purchase. At the same time, revenue can be increased by, again, really understanding the customer journey and actually identifying the point at which additional products can be introduced to the customer in an appropriate and even welcomed way by the customer during their journey. So in practice then, how do we prove the value of customer experience? Well, we've done a lot of work looking at the performance of all the brands in our survey, and we've come to some quite interesting conclusions, which I think you'll see really underline the fact that customer experience excellence drives both revenue and profitability. So looking down the left-hand side of this slide, we can see that over the last 5 years, our CEE top 10 have delivered 10 times the revenue growth of the FTSE top 100. Our CEE top 100 brands achieve 1.5 times the revenue growth of the bottom 100. Within our top 10, those in positions 1 to 10 achieve 3 times the revenue and profit growth of those in positions 91 to 100. And the 10 brands that over the 5 years we've seen most transformed are all achieving an average of 4 times the revenue growth of the remaining top 100. And I think for me the most powerful point of view is that overall the average of our top 100 brands are delivering double the profit growth of our bottom 100 brands. So strong evidence there that chasing customer experience effectively can be very, very positive for organizational KPIs. On to the specifics of this year's report then, and quite an interesting headline emerges. What this chart shows is a distribution for this year and last year of brands number 1 to brands number 295. The teal line is the 2017 result and the blue line is the 2016 result. And despite high levels of investment, despite high levels of customer focus across most of the organizations in the report that we cover, we can see that there's a distinct drop in how customers are perceiving the effectiveness of that customer experience year on year. So we've taken quite a significant step backwards. We don't see this as a lack of focus or a lack of investment necessarily. We see that we are, to all intents and purposes, living in an age of rising expectations. Now, our quote on the left is actually a post-war quote from an eminent US politician. But we see that as more true than it ever has been today. We find that a handful of companies, often new entrants without legacy issues, are finding their way into the everyday lives of not just early adopters and the urban elite, but into the lives of the majority of the UK. What this is doing is introducing everyday consumers to innovations that they find very easy to adopt, and it's baked into their expectations of their undertakings and dealings with every other organisation they work with. So we're right in the midst of a new age of rising expectations. And if you look on the right, we can see a diagram showing Professor Kano's model. Professor Kano did a lot of work in quality and customer satisfaction, and in fact continues to work in the area. And his point of view shows the extent to which components that delight consumers today, by tomorrow, simply become expected. So when new entrants are introducing new technology and customers are adopting it and liking it, it's just expected that every organisation they deal with will deliver that same level of innovation and customer excellence. So we see behind this year's apparent drop in performance, it's far more driven by customer expectations than it is by any lack of investment or focus. All of this then means, looking at our next slide, that actually the UK has recorded its lowest performance since comparative studies began in 2013. And the gap between the UK and the US is as wide as it ever has been after partially being closed last year. If we then look at the individual sectors across the 10 sectors we considered in the survey, we can see that this expectations issue is actually affecting every single sector we look at. So the best performing sectors in inverted commas were non-grocery and retail and FS, who saw their scores drop on average 2%. Industries such as logistics have dropped 6 points from what was a relatively low position already. So we can see these expectations are affecting every brand across every industry. But of course, some firms continue to buck the trend, and if we look at our top 10, we can see some familiar names doing a great job for the customer. So whether it's QVC's delivery of empathy, whether it's Lush's brilliant personalisation, whether it's Emirates' top-notch hardware or Ocado's incredible delivery against customer expectations, the top 10 shows that long-established brands can still lead for the customer, given the right focus, given the right infrastructure, and given the right mindset within the organisation. So picking up on that point, I'm now going to hand over to David, who's going to take us through our views on how companies should tackle the problems presented by what is this new age of expectations.
Thank you very much, Craig, and good afternoon, everybody. As Craig has talked about, the world is changing. We've seen a rapid escalation in customer expectations. We've seen that firms are struggling to keep up with that escalation and expectations. We're seeing that firms are losing revenue and opportunities to improve their costs. And we've seen that organisations that get it right disproportionately benefit from higher revenues and improved profitabilities. So what is it that's causing the issue within organisations? And we've called the report the Connected Experience Imperative because ultimately the research shows that the reason that firms are struggling to keep up with expectations is the lack of connectivity across key capabilities within the organisation. So why is it an imperative? Well, it's an imperative because the escalation of expectations isn't going to slow down. It's going to continue and it's going to accelerate. But vitally what we're seeing is that the organizations that are innovating, the organizations that are making a real difference for their customers, are actually new businesses, businesses that are coming into the sector or sectors without having the history or the background that inhibits the way they think or the way that they act. So from the point of view of the report, what we've done is we've looked at three sort of core themes, really. So the first is the connected experience, and we identified some 4 critical capabilities. So looking at organizations that do deliver connected experiences, what is it that those organizations do? So those 4 are, firstly, excellence, so a commitment at all levels in the business, really, to adopting best practice and to ensuring that in terms of the experience that the business delivers, it is not just as good as the rest of the sector, but actually draws on global best practice. The second is the area of engagement. So engagement being the degree to which the organization is able to energize its people, encourage its people, empower and enable its people to deliver great experiences. Thirdly, it's around the quality of execution. So how well does the business actually deliver consistently the target experience that it sets for itself? And then finally, and Craig touched on it earlier, what are the economics that underpin success in the area of customer experience, and how do we manage to those economics? And what we see is that organizations that are strong on those 4 capabilities tend to be much closer to their customer. And because they're closer to the customer, they're able to innovate. And one of the things we've identified in the report is that the degree of innovation that's taking place around events in the customer's life and the jobs that customers need to do. And we're going to expand on that as we go through the presentation. So where do the disconnections occur within an organization? And we've identified 6 areas where disconnections are substantive. So the first is at the senior level in the organization and how that level connects with the middle management structure. Then how the middle management structure connects with the frontline staff. And then where it all comes together, where the organization and the customer interact around an experience. We then have the customer themselves and the degree to which the organization has insight and knowledge about that customer. And then we've got the customer's ecosystem, so friends, family, colleagues that the customer interacts with or shares experiences with. So we see disconnections both within and across each of these 6 areas. So let's just work our way through it. So the first area of disconnection is at the senior level. And one of the things that we observe is that organizations don't always know or understand the customers that they're focused upon. So we've seen that, customer segmentation is changing. So if we go back a year or two, the most segmentation models focused on demographics. But what we see now is that the leading organizations are thinking more about behavioral segmentation or circumstantial segmentation. So what is the context that the customer finds themselves in, and how does that context drive the needs that they have for products and services? And then the psychographic segmentation. What is the mindset that the customer has when they go into an experience with that organization? So segmentation is changing. The second is that the customer strategy that's driven from that segmentation tends not to be as well articulated as it might be, which in turn has an impact on how well that strategy is effectively implemented by the sort of middle management tier. So what is a great strategy? Well, a great strategy is clear on the target customer. It looks at brand and internal values and determines how those manifest themselves for customer. It's a clear target experience. So what as a business are we seeking to achieve for the customer? And then what are the design principles that we're going to utilize to ensure that the organization and teams across the organization deliver cohesive and integrated experience that meet those design principles? At the middle management layer, in many businesses, despite voice of the customer programs, insight still doesn't really fuel decision making. Decision making tends to be separated or distanced from the insight from the customer. Many organizations have multiple initiatives underway. One organization that we spoke to had hundreds of different initiatives that it was trying to manage. But actually, when you look at those initiatives, only 11 made a difference or had an impact on the customer. So of all the things that we're doing, what are those things that will most readily improve the quality of the experience that we deliver? So that's the sort of upper layer of disconnections. The next area of disconnection is around the actual front line of the business. And there are several areas here that we see being problematic for most businesses. So the first being, does the culture of the organization support the strategy? And one of the most fundamental questions that I think an executive team can ask is, the degree to which our culture will inhibit or accelerate the strategy as we've articulated it. Second area being customer journeys, so the degree to which the organization has started to design customer journeys, map those journeys, put in measurement processes and measurement systems for those journeys. But increasingly, businesses, as they mature, now moving beyond the design of one journey, and they're beginning to industrialize the development of journeys. And that's more problematic, that's more difficult to manage. How do you virtually control the different journeys that you manage across a business when multiple teams are involved in designing and improving those journeys? What is the atlas or architecture, if you will, of journeys that we as a business have to manage? And how do we best structure ourselves to ensure that we manage those journeys effectively? And what we see from an American report, which we published earlier in the year, is that the typical functional organization really doesn't lend itself to the successful management of customer journeys. So the functional hierarchical business, developed during Victorian times, if not before, is all about steady state, consistent delivery of consistent widgets or objects. And of course today, we don't see that. The manufacturing industry is much smaller than it was. And businesses now sell ideas and concepts and intangibles, which the hierarchical organization really isn't equipped to deliver. So the other sort of final area here is the degree to which the employee experience, so whether they're based in a hierarchical business, and the culture that they're exposed to what degree does the employee experience align to the customer experience? So do we treat our employees in a way which will encourage them to want to deliver a great experience to their customers? And the next area is sort of the nexus, really, between where the organization and the customer comes together. We've already talked about the fact that expectations are escalating and customer perceptions of the quality of the experience that's being delivered to them are starting to fall short of the expectations that they have. But there's a couple of areas here which are important to look at. So the first is the degree to which digital is moving from automating experiences into innovation. And firms are finding it difficult to make that jump, that leap, if you will, between automating what we've always done historically or finding completely new ways of doing things that meet new needs for customers. And the other area here is the degree to which the experience is either under or over engineered. So what we see is that the customer journey is the default outcome of multiple different departments, all delivering their specific part to that customer journey. But often, when you add those parts up, they don't always add up to a great experience for the customer. But no department, no individual really has the understanding as to the degree to which the costs are aligned to optimize the delivery of that experience. So is that experience under or over engineered? And then finally, we've got the customer themselves. So the degree to which we understand the value of the customer. So, how is our experience tailored towards customers that represent different levels of value to us as a business? The insight that we get from the customer, to what degree do we understand their lives, their needs, and able to use that insight to drive decision making and to drive decision and innovation within the organization. And then finally, it's the customer's ecosystem. So the relationship that the customer has with friends, family, the degree to which the customer uses reviews and posts reviews. And I think it's something like 80% of most major purchases, customers use reviews or they interact with close and trusted advisors before they make a decision. So to what degree do we understand the network that influences the decisions that our customers make? So that's the sort of extent of the disconnections. And one of the things that I talked about in opening were the 4 primary capabilities. And what's interesting about these 4 primary capabilities is that if we look at each of the component parts within those capabilities, then they're actually mutually interconnected. And so for excellence, we see that organizations that focus on excellence have compelling strategies, they're clear on target experience, they're much closer to the customer. And USAA, who topped our US survey earlier this year, call it customer surround sound. Is that constantly bringing the insight from the customer into the organization? So customer life problems, issues, concerns, pain points are all made relevant and overt within the organization so that people are constantly being made aware of the things that customers are worried about and thinking about and have the opportunity of finding new and creative ways to solve those. Engagement, so the way in which staff are engaged. But the other thing that we're seeing increasingly is that it is the experience design that is driving transformation in the business. So it is the design of customer journeys and how journeys are optimized that actually is influencing the way that organizations are structuring themselves. And then execution, so the degree to which the brand, the internal values, the guiding principles are all being reflected in the experience that's being delivered. The experience quality, the insight ecosystem that provides insight into the organization. Aligning each of those is vital towards achieving quality execution. And finally, economics, so return on investment, customer lifetime value, the financial optimization of journeys, and how all of that drives commercial outcomes and commercial results. So when we looked at organization design in our US report, one of the things that we observed was the degree to which US organizations, and Craig touched on the fact that US organizations are significantly ahead now of the UK in terms of the quality of delivery of customer experiences. And one of the reasons for that is they've grappled earlier with the thorny question of how do we structure to deliver outstanding experiences to our customers, recognizing that hierarchical structures no longer are suitable for managing customer journeys. And USAA, probably the leader really when it comes to thinking through how they structure around customer journeys, have organized themselves around individual customer needs groups, where cross-functional teams from different departments are part of the group that is responsible for managing the customer journey or journeys that deliver those individual needs. So just to put a bit of color around that, as a bank, lots of banks think in product terms. So we think about credit cards, current accounts, savings accounts, loans, homeowner loans. But actually the customer need is about managing their money day to day. And each of those are just components of a solution to enable the customer to do that. So USAA have structured their business around the need, which is managing your money day to day. And one of the things that they've done, which is interesting, is that they've empowered the customer needs groups in their business and to some degree disempowered the product teams in their organization, recognizing if they were going to make a successful customer transformation, then the parts of the business that historically have held the financial resources where the power lies needs to be changed, needs to be shifted. And they've moved that power to the needs groups. So the needs groups decide what products are required, what the shape of those products need to be, and they deliver that specification to the product factories to then go away and build that and ensure that they build it compliantly and then deliver it back to the needs groups. So this is a very different way of thinking about how we structure and organize ourselves to meet the needs of the customer. And in the last report, we talked about the transition, so organizations moving from a hierarchy to a matrix, to needs-based structure. And now something like 30% of the Fortune top 500 companies have organized themselves very differently. They've organized themselves now around customer needs or customer segments or indeed specific customer journeys. So I guess the question that the report raises is the degree to which we will be able, as an enterprise, as an organization, as UK PLC indeed, to be able to deliver, fantastic experiences as long as we structure and organize ourselves around Victorian designs and ways of doing things. So the other area that we identified in the report is the role of events in the customer's life as being an enabler towards driving better experiences and driving innovation. And it's interesting when we look at the top 10 organizations, either consciously or subconsciously, each of those organizations structures the way they think and the way that they innovate around events that take place in the customer's lives, and then the jobs that the customer needs to do that arises because of that event. So for QVC, the events are relatively straightforward. They recognize that for many of their viewers and shoppers, then they're mothers, and they tend to, around 9 o'clock at night, want a little bit of me time. So they structure their programming around the event, which is mum's me time. Night out with the girls, birthdays, different events that take place where people can anchor their needs and the organisation can think about how it satisfies those needs. For Premier Inn, well, they look at things like business trips or families away for the weekend. Netflix, well, it's all about setting up sort of watching profiles, a night in with the lads, family time. For Publix, which we talked about in more detail in our US report, they've oriented around kind of the evening meal. And when you go into a Publix supermarket in the US, you can watch people making the meal. You can see all the ingredients, in one place. And a little bit like Marks and Spencer's, dine-in meal for two for under £10. It's a concept that says there's an event that takes place. How do we make it easy for our customers to make decisions and to make that event work for them? For Lush, it's around sort of bath time and again, me time. First Direct, focus around sort of, life events, birthdays, the anniversary of joining First Direct. So it's interesting to see how organizations are using this concept of events to drive the design and innovation of the experiences that they then go on to deliver. One such organization is Hilton Hotels, who have jumped a number of places in our study this year, and some of that helped by the app that they've developed. So if we work through the sort of process that they've been through, they have a loyalty scheme, the H Honours scheme, and they were looking to develop an app that allowed their customers to use that more effectively. But in the process, they looked at an event, and that event was for a specific customer group, which is business customers, booking in or checking into a hotel, which was the event. And I said, what are the different jobs that that customer needs to do at check-in? Well, they need to, walk up to the desk, they need to queue at the desk, they need to check in, they need to be able to use their points and redeem their points if that's appropriate, and then they need to be able to get into the room. So how do we find a way of making all of that a lot easier? So their app allows their business customer to select their favorite room, so it's a room that they particularly like. If it's a new room, then they can use the view from, or see the view from the room, because Hilton has teamed up with Google Earth, so you can see what the outlook is from the room. For business people, you often want to arrive before the check-in time or leave after the sort of the last checkout time. So, arrive before 3, leave after 12. And what Hilton do is provide you with a view as to what the room status is. Is the room required before or after those checkout times? So you can, retain the room if that's appropriate to your stay. If you want to pay for the room, then you can redeem the points. And your phone acts as a key, so it allows you to get in and out of the room. So in the process of looking at all the different jobs that need to be done, they've effectively designed them all out and made it much easier and much simpler for their customers to be able to, business customers to be able to access the room of their choice when they want, how they want, and pay in a way that suits them best. So customer closeness, and we talk about this a lot, so being able to put yourself in the shoes of your customer and get really, really close to your customer. Again, I talked about USAA, but also QVC, who've topped our study this time round, are incredibly close to their customers. They understand their customer at an extraordinary level of detail. They know what she looks like, who she looks like. Typically their customers, 86% of their customers are women. They know psychographically what's important to that individual, and they are very careful and structured in the way in which they deliver an experience that meets those particular requirements. Another organisation that does that particularly well is Nationwide Building Society. They moved up to number 11 in our study this year. But one of the things that's interesting about Nationwide is the sheer scale of customer insight that they gather from multiple different sources around the organisation to understand both how they're delivering for the customer, but also the areas that they need to think about improving. One of the things I've really liked about Nationwide is they have a Nationwide house. So in a warehouse in Swindon, they've created a house where their employees are encouraged to go to put themselves in the shoes of their customers when they're thinking about new product designs or new experiences, just to orientate them into the right mindset to think customer rather than necessarily just thinking product. So we've put together a checklist. So in the report, there's a range of questions that you can answer to check where you currently sit across each of those sort of 4 critical capabilities. The report, you can download it for free from the Nunwood website. And you might find it a useful exercise to see where your organisation sits against each of those areas. So let me hand back to Craig now, just to wrap things up before we move into questions.
Okay, thank you, David. So just 2 or 3 slides now on further resources we have available. So KPMG Nunwood have just launched our new Experience Cloud product, which is designed to transform the value of customer experience in your organisation. It's designed to really help the organisation harness the voice of the customer, designed to help you design experiences and execute effective change. It's designed to help you master the economics of customer experience and help you understand the true ROI of customer experience initiatives. And finally, it's designed to make your organisation culturally highly customer-centric. So, of course, we'd be very happy to come and show you a demo of that, should you require it. We have access to the Excellence Centre available, and in fact, membership brings several other benefits. You can download all current publications, and in fact, this report and several past reports are available. By all means, apply for membership. You can access member training, register for upcoming events, and we have a blog that is continually updated with customer experience stories and narratives from around the world. Just a quick word to say that recording link of this webinar will be sent to everybody who's registered, and I think now we've got a quarter of an hour to go through some of the questions, Tim.
We have lots of questions, so I'm delighted to say. So the first one I think you probably touched on, Craig, which is, will the slides be distributed? So I think the recording is going to be available early next week for all of those who've registered for the event. So let me just pick up on a couple, and Craig, maybe I can sort of pick your brains on the next one, which is, if we look at the UK and the US, which parts of customer experience do you think that UK businesses are failing to grasp? Or, what are US companies doing better than we're able to do in the UK?
So I think, David, we increasingly see a focus on the customer and a structural change around the customer. So that, from the outside looking in, that is the most significant difference I see in what we're seeing in the US. So you'll notice a lot of our very cutting edge examples are from the US today. So for example, the USAA, Publix, Hilton Honors, these are all highly customer centric and customer structure related changes in the way they do business. And to deliver some of those changes, they've had to really knock down some internal walls, move away, as David says, from these Victorian steady state structures, and really understand the speed at which the world is changing.
Yeah, I mean, I guess probably the perspective that we see on this is that lots of organisations try and go straight to the answer. So there's a focus on customer journey mapping, rightly. But actually, quite often when you get into looking at a journey, you have to move upstream and look at the strategy. What is the customer strategy? Who is that journey going to be, targeted at? What is the target experience for that journey? So for many organisations, I guess, one of the fundamentals is, have they got a clear customer experience strategy at the outset that guides and manages the way in which the organisation is implementing its approach to customer experience?
And again, David, I think those strategies are very specific and very related to the brand differentiation they're seeking to drive. We still see a lot of European organisations with relatively bland sort of motherhood statement style strategies that don't really guide the business day to day in what people should and shouldn't be doing.
Yeah, I think it's true. So the next question, slightly different, but it's, are there any similar studies run at an EMEA level? So are there comparable results for sectors in EU countries? So there is some good news on that, which is we are currently in field collecting data across 12 countries, and that data will be released in the second quarter of 2018, and they'll cover such EU countries such as France and Italy, but also countries like China and India. So we will have a very comprehensive picture, I would imagine, during the second half of 2018. And indeed, by the end of next year, the CEE will be present in 17 countries. And so quite a lot of information which will allow us to look across different regions and look at the different types of experiences that are being delivered in different geographies.
And I think to the specific question, that will all be in field at the same time and results reviewed at the same time? Okay, so another question here. Is there any scientific proof of a relation between CEE and employee experience? So, David, I know that's an area of interest for yourself.
It is, yeah. And if we go back to the late 80s, very early 90s, there was a piece of work done called the service profit chain. And what the service profit chain did was it established a scientific empirical link between the experience that employees have, so employee satisfaction, customer satisfaction, and how customer satisfaction then manifests itself in customer behaviour, so willingness to buy and loyalty, and then the commercial outcomes of the business. And the research was conducted with Sears, a large retail store in the States, but has been conducted in many, many different places. And what we see is a very strong empirical link between employee engagement, employee satisfaction, customer experience, customer behaviour, and then the profitability of the business as a consequence. So one for you, Craig. Would you say the companies referenced in the innovation and event slide are mature in their delivery of those events?
So mature is an interesting word here, because I think what characterises a lot of those businesses is their willingness to innovate. So for me, the word maturity tends to sort of conjure up we've got this design now, let's just keep on delivering it, which is that cannot keep you at the cutting edge because of, as we saw Professor Carnot's model, today's innovations and delights are tomorrow's expected experiences. So whilst they are mature, and whilst what we know with those businesses is they take a very customer-centric look and understand what they're trying to achieve and how their brand can be played out in achieving those target experiences, I think the key is the organisation needs to be ready to innovate in order to be at the forefront of what we see as the rising age of customer expectations.
I think that's right, Craig. And I think if I could just signpost people towards some very deep insight in this area. A professor in the US called Clayton Christensen started to talk about the whole concept of events and using customer circumstances as a means for innovation, going back some 10 years or so ago now. And someone who worked with him is a chap called Tony Ulwick, and both of them have published extensively and have YouTube videos that articulate how organizations can go about using events, using circumstances, using the concept of jobs to be done that arises from those events as a mechanism for sparking innovation. So that's a extremely good reference source for people that are interested in that particular area of the report. So one of the things that has also, one of the other questions is, and Craig, if I can pitch this to you, if I need to do one thing to begin with, what would you recommend?
So obviously it's a big question, but from what we've seen, a focus on customer journeys as opposed to touch points, we see driving a transformational effect. If it doesn't drive a transformational experience straight away, it drives a very different approach to understanding what the customer goes through. So we see a lot of companies pedaling very hard, measuring touchpoint performance and designing touchpoint performance. But time and time again, when we read customer narratives about what went wrong, we find that organizations aren't connecting touchpoints together effectively. And in fact, the inefficiencies, the sort of friction between touchpoint A and touchpoint B can often drive the majority of customer issues and a huge amount of costs that a well-designed measurement system can really help you get on top of by understanding what the customer is trying to achieve rather than simply the momentary touchpoint experience that a customer has. Got another couple of questions, David. Do these rules apply to the B2B world?
They do indeed. So in the back end of last year, we published our business-to-business report where we looked at 120 organizations, 60 in the UK, 60 in the US, and we interviewed some 3,000 decision makers, members of the decision-making unit, influencers, and users to really sort of understand what the state of business-to-business customer experience looked like. And what we saw is that the 6 pillars and the 4 sort of core organizational capabilities were just as important in the business-to-business world and just as relevant in terms of strategic design as they are in the consumer world. And following that piece of work, we also did some deep dives into specific industry sectors where we looked at industry sectors that have quite complex value chains that need to be managed between the manufacturing business and the end customer or the end user, end client. And we got into quite a degree of detail around what those value chains looked like and what was important. And again, equally as important to the 6 pillars and those 4 sort of core capabilities. So yes, and I suppose the final point to that is we saw that business-to-business organizations that were also business-to-consumer organizations delivered much better business-to-business experiences, largely as a consequence of their learning from the consumer side of their business.
Do we have any evidence, David, of any UK companies moving to a customer-oriented structure?
I think we're seeing the start of that, Craig. So we're seeing organizations beginning to think about it. So, I think businesses are increasingly becoming aware that this many-to-one relationship where you have multiple different departments all relating to a single customer journey is, potentially unworkable in the long term. And, we hear various horror stories from companies. One particularly sticks in my mind, which was a bank where the post room had decided that they would send debit cards on mail sort 2 as opposed to mail sort 1 because it saved them, £250,000. And the net result was, it was deleterious to the experience of the customer, so they were now waiting 10 days as opposed to getting their card in 2. It drove failure demand into the contact center as customers rang up to find out where their debit card was, and it drove costs in operations as couriers and special express delivery had to be commissioned to get debit cards to people that needed it sooner. So the net result, I think, is that businesses are beginning to realize that this is something they need to tackle. And what we've seen, I think, is that some organizations have put an individual in charge of the end-to-end journey. That's very difficult because that individual needs some fairly strong diplomatic and project management skills, which aren't always in evidence. Or they've taken each of the participants in that journey and put them into a forum or a group that has overall responsibilities for that journey, and collectively that group decides whether the post room can move its delivery schedule or not. And so more and more businesses, I think, are now moving to a view that says we need to structure ourselves in a very different way. And we've seen, USAA, Kiwi Bank in Australia is another example, Cisco, a range of US high-tech organizations structuring themselves around customer needs. And I think, maybe we are at the start of the journey that organizations need to take to move towards that. But I don't think we've yet seen any revolutionary organisation designs or operating models appearing in the UK, more an awareness of the problem rather than what that solution might look like. So one of the things we were talking about earlier, Craig, is sort of customer surround sound. And what does that look like and what is it?
So I think our sort of definition of this is a comprehensive and circular view of what the customer is saying, is thinking, and is actually doing. So I guess voice of the customer first became big around a decade ago, where customer ratings were recorded and fired off to the front line for action. And of course that delivered a lot of activity on the front line, but it didn't especially help and still doesn't help with making profitable strategic transformational change. So customer surround sound for me is an ability to tap into multiple pieces of information about what the customers are saying. So that's clearly a well-structured voice of the customer program. It can be brand tracking, it can be social media chat, it can be social media interaction with a brand. Then there's a whole range of internal data streams which effectively say how the customer's voting with their wallet, so sales data, conversion data, margin data. So bringing all of that data together and being able to identify what the customer thinks, what they do when they have that thought, and the cost of the customer doing that or not doing that on a macro scale, that I think is what customer surround sound is to me.
And I guess it's, thinking about insight as an ecosystem, isn't it? So it's thinking about all the different sources of data, as you've outlined, that we can bring together into a single picture of the truth. So, what is the customer thinking, feeling, and doing? And how do we get a very accurate fix on what we as an organisation, can do with that data and how it, drives our decision making, our innovation, and our product design. So yeah, customer surround sound is a great phrase, isn't it? And comes from USAA primarily. So I think we're probably coming close to the end of the session. So a big thank you from me and from Craig.
Thank you.
And thanks very much for listening. We will, as I say, make this available next week if you want to share it with others. But our website is the place to go if you want to access any further information or further detail on the topics that we've talked about. So thank you very much.